Good evening. How are you? I am Carla Renata. I will be moderating this discussion, post-discussion, regarding the Nickel Boys.
Long time, long time, long time.
Woo! That's it, L. You're doing great.
What happened to that one kid I used to hang with all the time?
You don't remember?
Remember what?
You really don't remember.
I don't know what more you want me to remember.
What are you gonna do? It's now or never.
Hello.
So first, we're going to bring out the director, Mr. RaMell Ross. Next, we're going to bring out Elwood, Mr. Ethan Herisse. And last but not least, Mr. Brandon Wilson, who plays Turner. Have a seat, you guys. All right, here we go. So me and the boys have done this a few times, and I always start out our conversation with this question that I know RaMell hates, but we're gonna do it. In a lot of people that have screened this film, including myself, when we watched the film, we looked and we were like, what's up with the alligator? Right? Y'all wanna know what's up with the alligator?
Raise your
right?
hand if you wondered what the alligator was.
See, I'm telling
Damn
you.
it!
Damn. No. So if you could just break down the historical context of the alligator and the scenes and how you got the alligator in the scenes and how y'all navigated all that, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks for saying, you all. What a wild part of the filming process to script and then be given permission to have, I say a wild alligator because actually it's redundant. It's impossible to train an alligator, apparently. So all alligators are wild, by the way. Even ones that seem domestic, they will eat you. We, as I imagine you all realize, the imagery of the film is very layered. It both is supposed to be experiential, also metaphor, maybe allegory, who knows. Not supposed to sit as easily read. And so the alligator plays a practical, it has a practical purpose, which is that in Florida, you could, in theory, see an alligator walking around. It happens to a lot of people. But from a historical standpoint, I'm sure many of you know that, and if not, hopefully this is interesting. Has to be. How could it not? When I came across it, blew my mind. North Florida and moving west in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they used black children as alligator bait. So they would, and it's strange too because it's so ridiculous. But it was like an actual practice. It wasn't a thing that one or two people did. It was something that communities did, and it was well known to the point where in the montage, we put a postcard, a real postcard of that act. And so, what a tragic thing, and wanted to sort of incorporate it in the film in some way.
Thank you for answering that. Did you hear the response? See, that's why I always ask that question, because people are always, oh yeah, right, I want to know about that. I also want to talk about shooting the film from the actor's perspective, because you guys had cameras on you, right, at some point or another. So I want to talk about the fact that as actors, the first rule of thumb is you don't look in the camera. You're not supposed to look in the lens. Right? And now you're in a situation where you literally have to break all those rules and relearn your craft for this particular project. So if you, Ethan, and Brandon could speak to that, I would appreciate it.
Hey, everybody. RaMell said, thank you for staying. This is really cool. Yeah, it was definitely a lot of unlearning during the process because, like you said, it's one of the first things that you learn. You're not supposed to look at this thing that's kind of like intruding in the scene and in the moment that you're having with your scene partner. But man, RaMell believed in what he was doing, and he trusted us, and we felt that trust and that confidence in us very early on. So when it came to doing it, it was just about diving in and believing in him as well. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we were able to do it and be confident while doing it.
I'm gonna jump in because it's super strange, right? Like, I like that we didn't tell them anything. You know, we didn't share the super high concepts of the film. We didn't ask them we weren't like, okay, you know, when you're looking in the camera, you're really looking at the audience, and like the audience is gonna be having we very much we didn't ask very much because you guys came in so open. And so I think we didn't need to over-explain or try to convince you all. I think you guys came to play, and which I think just made it all fun because it felt like a genuine experiment, you know? But just wanted to throw that in there because, yeah, I don't remember giving you much instruction aside from like that certain point where it looked like you were looking in, because if you look to the left or the right, that it went off. Mm-hmm. And then we just kind of went from there and never talked about it again unless someone slipped up, you know? Yeah.
While we're there, I'll get to you, Brandon. Stop it. While we're there, can we talk about the whole point of view shooting of the film? Because I noticed when I watched it that the character is looking up, right? Mm-hmm. And is shot down at him, but we never really see him. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about the fact that you decided to make that artistic choice and then flip it around once he got older?
Yeah, it's not unprecedented for cameras to take on, for momentary moments, the point of view of the characters. I mean, it's been embedded in the history of cinema. I think for me, one thing that I wanted to drive home, or we wanted to drive home, the larger collaborative group, is that, you know, cinema hasn't necessarily given that agency to people of color's perspectives. Like, we haven't allowed for whatever that power is from the silver screen to be distinctly kind of black, whatever, for lack of a better word. And so it's also just distinctly universal. Like, if you don't even know that Elwood's a person of color, I imagine every single one of you have at least vague memories or some sort of emotional impressions of being young and like looking up at towering figures who are your family members, or like the Christmas tree is 70 feet tall because you're so low, climbing under tables and playing with toys. And so, yeah, we wanted to put the camera where the child would be, and in that sort of provide, you know, the viewer access to the sort of the life gaze that Elwood had, which we hoped was a sort of emotional connection to him, and gave you a little peek as to how he saw the world, which was just quite beautiful.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Brandon, can you talk? He's like, uh-oh. Can you talk about delving into Turner and finding him within you, and how you as Turner bonded with Ethan as Elwood?
Yes. Damn, this jacket is squeaky. I don't think I have that many layers of separation to it. It felt a lot more intuitive. Yeah, I'm never very analytical with acting or playing. That's kind of, you read the words and something starts to inform your movement, a voice comes out, and then I get to go play with Ethan, and then that starts to inform something different of how these two people relate to one another, and yeah.
Can you talk about your audition for Turner?
Yeah, it was a self-tape. And then I think like a couple months later, I got to do a Zoom call back with RaMell and Jocelyn and the casting director, Victoria Thomas. and it was lovely. It was very difficult. And
What made it difficult?
no, sorry, I was just going back to
Okay, all
That
right.
was just for Ethan.
See, I'm listening. I'm just saying. I'm listening.
No, it wasn't. It was. I mean, we met RaMell, and it's very easy, instantly becomes, there's a confidence, as Ethan was talking about, there's a warmth, there's a trust. So we played with the scenes, and then I got to do a chemistry read in New Orleans with a different actor, and that was nice. And then I got to do a chemistry read with Ethan in LA. Yeah, and I think that was the moment where I think it was very clear that I didn't know what they were looking for, because the first actor that I did a chemistry read with was he was lovely, and he was good, and he did all the things. But something about Ethan and his eyes and his presence, it became very clear that we were, I don't know, on to whatever they were looking for.
I love that. There are two actors that aren't here with us that I always like to talk about, but the one I really like to talk about is the incomparable Miss Anjanou Ellis.
Shout out, Anjanou.
Shout out to Anjanou. The scene that she does with the cake where she talks about your portion is your pain. I would love for you guys to speak about what that means to you on the other side of this project, because we're very well aware of what it meant to you in the process of shooting the film. But now that you've shot the film and had all these experiences post-shooting, what does it mean to you now?
Damn, Carla, really?
Yeah, I got to bring it.
Brandon? Just kidding.
Yes, Brandon, you go first.
No, I'll go first. I'll go
first if you want me to go first.
Yeah, I mean, do you have thoughts on it?
I mean, I do.
Yeah.
I think, we've talked about this a few times. I think, I don't know. I mean, speaking from Turner's point of view, this idea of your portion is your pain. There's this idea. We talk about the cards you were dealt and this situation that you've been confined within. I think for myself, and I don't know, to speak on Turner a little bit, to mix those worlds together, there's this idea of believing in the confinement which we've been put in, and I think Turner very much believed in the reality of his portion of the universe, this idea of being trapped, being an animal, he very much believed in these walls, and I think that his portion of the cake was only pain. But within that, he had the intelligence and the wit in order to figure out how to, I don't know, I guess to go with the analogy, how to make this piece of cake a little bit more, sprinkles, a little more colorful. But I think in meeting Elwood, I think the relationship helps each other to recognize that they have more than just this piece of the world. They can break out of this confinement, and they can, that the world can be so much bigger than, I don't know, these limiting beliefs that we constantly are put upon us, and that we adapt as our own. Adopt as our own. Adopt.
You said it right.
The second one.
Yeah. I love that answer. See, I knew you could do it. I want to also talk about the fact that Colson Whitehead's books have been adapted twice, The Underground Railroad, which Barry Jenkins adapted, and this one with you. And in both instances, you all approach the way violence is portrayed on the screen very differently. We don't really see the violence. And I just wanted to talk about the impetus to do it from that vantage point, because I believe that there's a lot left to the imagination in this film in particular. And I love that you leave that to the imagination. And I was wondering if you made that decision for that reason, to leave it up to the imagination, particularly the scenes with Hamish.
Yeah, I think we did. My co-writer and I, Jocelyn Barnes, we wanted to leave a bunch of the actual visualization of suffering up to the imagination, but also it's kind of there's just so many ways to do it, and the second that you start to think of other ways to do it, you realize you don't have to show it. Also, one must, I think, specifically as a person of color, think about how often it's been shown and the sort of, you could argue, the historical consequences of showing it. one thing I like to mention in relationship to this, which kind of clarifies it. There's this, I always butcher his name, Slavoj Žižek. I love this philosopher. He's public intellectual, really scatterbrained, really idiosyncratic. But Žižek wrote this essay called "A Holiday from History," and he talks about a whole bunch of things. It's in reference to Dial History, a really brilliant film. But he says that he asked, the reader to think about 9/11 and the Twin Towers collapsing, and he almost graphically talks about, bodies, limbs falling from the sky, hitting people. Like the streets were just littered with like actual human remains. And then he's like, how many of those images have you seen? And I'm like, oh, that's actually a good point. I actually haven't seen not one image. I remember the image of the guy upside down falling, that silhouette, a couple other ones. But he was like, so any natural disaster, the cartels in Mexico, war in X country, how many of those images have you seen? And I'm like, all of them. You see the bodies on the street. And he's like, what's that mean? It happens to them. It doesn't happen to us. And obviously we know it happens to us because we experienced it. It was a national tragedy. But the visualization of the thing has something to do with the tolerance of it, he's arguing. And so that's what one can think about as it relates to seeing people, Black people suffer in the U.S. And so, yeah, there's so many ways to do it. And we wanted to try if we could do it in a more sensory way to channel the viewer's relationship to those images, force you to think of the things, and then therefore, put the onus on you.
Okay. Can we talk about your collaboration with Jomo, your cinematographer?
Yes.
And how you guys went about creating the images that you did, because it's absolutely gorgeous. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, well, Jomo is an interesting fellow. He is, I'd say, I don't know, he's just like a wizard of technicality. Like he, thinks about, light and emotion. Like those are his two relationships in the image. Like you look at an image and like, how can you shape it so that it's eliciting or expressing some specific emotion, which is something that I'm not necessarily keen to. I kind of come into fiction filmmaking as a quote unquote documentarian, for lack of a better word. And I'm the type of person that can, use any light. Like doesn't even matter the light. It matters the frame, and you have to figure out how to do the best with what you have. And that's part of it. It's part of what reality brings. And so, I think one thing that Jomo was able to do immediately was just sort of elevate the image to a place of cinema and a place of deep, almost, I'd say like kind of respect for Black visuality, like to give, 4 hours of thought and conversation to a 15-second frame is an act of endearment, I think. And I'd say first and foremost, that was kind of one thing I noticed about Jomo is his particular desire to really speak the language of cinema as it relates to Black folks, but also many other things. But I'll just say that.
Let's talk about the casting for a second. So let's talk about what it was about Ethan and Brandon that made you go, these are the dudes.
I feel like just by the way that they answered the questions, you guys kind of know. I could be wrong. But like Brandon, when Brandon had his casting tape, like Brandon was literally just Brandon. Like Brandon has an effortlessness about him, He is a very spiritual being. If I would ask him to describe himself, but as I see him as a spiritual person who is really interested in feeling and experiencing the world. And that may not necessarily rhyme with who Turner is in Colson's narrative, but in terms of having him read who Turner is and having whoever Brandon imagines Turner to be sort of move through his space, and then him trying to participate in that, there's this authenticity. Like he just read as an authentic Turner. And everyone else kind of read as someone who was trying to be Turner, like someone who was acting as Turner. And Brandon was just like sitting there, like really nonchalant, like reading. It was perfect. And in the same sort of enthusiasm that Ethan brought to the question you asked him was exactly what we noticed in the casting tape. It was something that he has like an optimism about him. I almost feel like I've said that 1,000 times, but he has like an optimism and sort of a joy for life, and also like a desire to be, I don't know, in communion. Like I've never had a conversation with Ethan and I felt like he wasn't there, and so that read immediately in the casting tape. And we found him really late, which is, I guess, I want to say the sad part, because it would have been great to have him earlier because we moved on to other things. We had to look at a million tapes. But yeah, I can't imagine the film without these two. I also couldn't imagine the film without Anjanou and Hamish and David. It's really strange how that becomes something that's, inextricable from everything we understand or everything you all saw.
Can you share the story about how Anjanou came to the project? Because I just love that story. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah, so Anjanou Ellis, as Ellis Taylor, I'm sure you all know, is an entity in herself. And apparently she had been trying to get in contact. I teach at Brown. She had been trying to get in contact with me for like 3 years. So she was calling the university, asking for RaMell. And of course, universities are big machines, and you can't just call the operator and be like, yo, I want to speak to this professor. And they were like, sure, miss. I'll put you on hold. Click, type of thing. And she left many messages. I think she called multiple times. And then we're trying to figure out casting with, all the companies involved. And Anjanou's our first one. We're like, if we can get Anjanou, this film has a chance, And then I end up Zooming with her, and like this is the best part. The whole time we have like a 2-hour conversation. I'm just quite literally like the computer's on a dresser right here. You can see my face, and my legs are just like shaking like this the entire time. And I'm just like trying my hardest to convince her to like do this role. And she's just kind of like nonchalant, Anjanou, asking questions and interested. And then it's over, and I'm like I was at Jocelyn's apartment. I was like, I don't know, I guess it could have worked. And then come to know that like she wanted to do it no matter what. Yeah, like it didn't even matter. That's funny, right? Yeah.
I think it's hilarious. I want to talk about, and I'm just going to read this because I don't want to mess it up. So we're in a time in America right now where all over the country, our history, Black people's history, is attempting to be erased. And so the Nickel Boys story is a real story about the Dozier School, right? And that really happened. And so Colson just kind of, spun it in a way to make it a narrative film. But having said that, so when one of the professors in the film says, imagine a textbook with nothing to cross out, living in the time that we're living in and experiencing right now, how do y'all feel about that line? Having a time where you have a textbook where there's nothing that you have to cross out.
Yeah, what do you think about that, E? No rush.
Yeah, we got time. Go ahead, take your time.
I don't know, it deeply saddens me because this movie is taking place during the civil rights movement in the 1960s. It's 2024, and we're having conversations about books being withheld from students, and that cover certain topics, and stories such as the one like the Dozier School for Boys, the real life story, and of all the other reform schools that existed across the country, are something that can really easily be swept under the rug if it weren't for novels like Nickel Boys, and if it weren't for the movie that we had made. So I don't know. It deeply saddens me, and it also the way that people have been experiencing this movie, and talking to me, RaMell, Brandon, other members of the cast and crew, has brought about a bit of hope in humanity overall, and like the knowledge that people do care. There are people around that understand that what's happening, and things like that are happening in the real world is wrong, and it can only hope that this movie continues to be watched by people that care, and people that are able to share with others and hopefully, lead to, this is such an Elwood thing to say as I'm saying it, but like lead to the change that we that we want to see, that we imagine. It's unbelievable. That line is like from a novel that takes place in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, and where it has, ties to things that are happening today. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's bananas. It is. Did you want to add anything, RaMell? I know you do.
You can always add something.
Go ahead, knock yourself out.
I mean, it's like well, first of all, it's impossible to consider, right? Imagine a world in which you don't have to cross those things out of a textbook. Like, no one in this room has ever, at least as a person of color, I imagine, has ever imagined a world in which racism didn't exist. Like, how could you? We're born into it, and it's been hoisted upon us. It's something, we're confronted with, despite every desire to not have to consider oneself as a raced person in the world. And I think that we should, because, what a wonderful culture, and there's much love, and there's much to be proud of. But additionally, you have to always account for, the pre-existing systematic problems that are just attached to a visuality that, has a nefarious origin. It's kind of like, I don't know what it's like actually, but I feel like reading that line and making this movie, and then seeing DeSantis, I refuse to believe that he believes he's doing the right thing. I think he's just, a puppet of himself or a puppet of someone else. But to think that that's happening now, I think it gives more wind in the sails of projects like this, and kind of makes us double down with, hopefully, with the power of what we think we can accomplish through cinema, which is more experiential, Yeah, I could say more, but it is really, really depressing,
We've talked about how this film takes place during the Civil Rights Movement in 1963, right? Elwood grows up in a world where he believes anything is possible because of Dr. King and because what is transpiring at that time in America. And then he gets arrested and discovers that he's not different than anybody else. He's just another black boy who has been put in a system due to no fault of his own. How do you feel about Elwood's point of view on that? Because I think at some point Elwood doesn't really think, and I hate to say it this way, but it's the most blunt way to say it. I think at some point he doesn't realize that he's a black boy, that he thinks that he's not, he's being held to a different set of rules because the world he sees is changing around him, right?
Yeah. And then you were just asking for my thoughts on that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. It was something that I could really relate to. I moved to Burbank, California in 2012 with my family, who loved me and supported the dream I had to be an actor, and I grew up in a really safe neighborhood, and it was in a great school system. I was really able to relate with Elwood's point of view, and not kind of seeing in himself as black, because I never had any, experiences that forced me to really acknowledge all the unfairness that was. I could see and acknowledge that it was happening around me, but there was a bit of naivety, or is that how you pronounce that? Naivete, because I hadn't experienced it myself. So it was about, when it came to playing him, it was about kind of rediscovering that in myself and going back to that place when I was younger. But I called Elwood brave maybe like a week or two ago, and I was saying that his bravery is something that I admire, and I feel like that he is braver than I could ever imagine to be, because he finds himself in this terrible situation where normally that point of view should be torn away from you, and you should never look back. But instead, he meets Turner, someone who challenges it, and he doubles down. he continues to fight for it. And that is I consider that to be brave and one of the most admirable things about him. So, yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Thank you, Ethan. Brandon, I'm going to give you one more chance. I'm going to give you one more question. All right.
I thought I killed the last one.
You slayed it, dude. You really did. But I'm going to ask you this question. Elwood and Turner, for lack of a better way to say it, are more like spiritual brothers in the course of this film from a different vantage point. Turner is somebody who doesn't have family, but Elwood has his grandmother who's there for him, right? And so from a spiritual point, because you are a very spiritual young man, you're very, like that. So from that vantage point, talk about inhabiting Turner and inhabiting that relationship between Elwood and Turner, knowing that this dude is literally the only family that you have.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know, we get to keep exploring this stuff in hindsight, like from a lot of different angles that I haven't looked at it. And I feel like there was something, not in a judgmental way, but I think maybe very selfish about Turner I think early on. Like, I think maybe that spark that he sees in Elwood in that first moment, and some of the movements that he does to get Elwood to be a part of the community service. And I think there was like an escape factor for him in that, an escape of his loneliness that you're talking about. So not necessarily, I think there was a part of him that wasn't trying to help Elwood or to guide him at first. I think there was just a necessity of no longer being alone in this place and having someone to, misery loves company, I suppose. And then from there, when he does invite him or manipulate him into his space, then they start to form a true bond. And as Ethan was saying, Turner starts to challenge his naivete and his hope and tries to fix him and rob him of that. And when Elwood doubles down, I think it does start to kind of crack Turner's tunnel vision of survival. And he does start to breathe and let that other presence into his being.
Thank you, Brandon. I knew you could do it. You slayed it again. Yay. Yeah, he deserves applause for that.
That was a good answer.
That was a great answer. Well, I think we have come to the end of this discussion, and thank you so much on behalf of RaMell, Ethan, Brandon, and the RaP Screenings. Thank you so much for coming out and spending your time. Have a safe trip home.